The galaxy was vast, filled with countless planets, alien races, and powerful fleets. Yet, none of them had ever seen anything like Earth. For centuries, Earth had been a small, insignificant planet in the eyes of the galaxy's great powers. It was a world that struggled with its own survival, caught in the chaos of wars, politics, and environmental disasters. Yet, the humans had always persevered. Little did anyone know this small, seemingly weak planet was about to make its mark in a way no one could ever have imagined. The alien empire of Zethara, one of the largest and most advanced in the galaxy, had always viewed Earth with disdain. Their commanders, generals, and leaders believed that Earth's fleet of warships, a handful of outdated ships, were no match for their massive armada. They laughed at the humans' pitiful attempts to challenge them. To them, Earth was a joke, a planet whose time had long passed. "We have nothing to fear," said Zithra's supreme commander, Varku, as he stood in front of a massive display showing Earth's fleet. "These ships are nothing more than relics of the past. We will crush them without a second thought." His officers nodded in agreement. Earth's warships were old, their designs outdated, and their technology far behind the advanced weaponry of the Zethara fleet. But what Varku and his fleet didn't know was that Earth had been hiding something far more powerful than anyone could imagine. They had been preparing for years, developing new technologies and strategies that would change everything. The fleet assembled at Earth's command consisted of just a few dozen ships. They were built using old technology but had been secretly upgraded in ways that no one in the galaxy knew. Their weapons were enhanced, their shields reinforced, and their engines were capable of speeds that could rival any advanced alien ship. But Earth had also built something else, something more dangerous. It was a plan, a strategy so cunning and unexpected that the aliens wouldn't even see it coming. The enemy laughed and made jokes as Earth's fleet approached their stronghold. "Look at them, marching to their doom," one of the Zethara generals chuckled. "They think they can challenge us with these ancient ships?" Earth's fleet wasn't large, but it was powerful in ways no one could predict. The crew aboard each ship was made up of the bravest humans, warriors who had fought for survival on their home planet. They weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for their survival, for their families, and for the future of Earth. They knew the odds were against them, but they didn't care. They had no choice but to win. If they didn't, humanity would be wiped out. Captain Emma Scott, commander of one of Earth's most formidable ships, the Vanguard, stood at the bridge, looking out at the vastness of space. Her crew was ready, and their resolve was unwavering. She glanced at her officers, who were preparing for the mission ahead. They were all aware of the risks. They knew that Zithra's fleet was overwhelming. But they also knew something else, that Earth had a few tricks up its sleeve. "Ready the weapons," Captain Scott ordered, her voice calm but firm. "We may be small, but we fight with everything we've got." The crew responded in unison, the hum of the ship's engines growing louder as the ship powered up. The Vanguard wasn't the biggest ship in the fleet, but it was one of the fastest. Captain Scott had made sure of that. As the fleet advanced towards the Zethara stronghold, they kept their formation tight, hidden behind the dark clouds of an asteroid field. The Zethara fleet, stationed in a large formation around the planet Koraid, had no idea what was coming. They were focused on their own celebrations, believing that the Earth fleet would be no match for them. Commander Varku continued to mock the humans, thinking they would simply turn and retreat, as they always did. He had no respect for them, no understanding of their true power. But that was about to change. As Earth's fleet neared the enemy lines, Captain Scott gave the signal to move forward. They moved fast, using the asteroid field for cover. The Vanguard darted in and out of the rocks, avoiding detection from the Zethra's sensors. The other ships followed suit, forming a silent, deadly array. "Now!" Captain Scott yelled. In an instant, the fleet opened fire. Bright flashes of light filled the dark expanse of space as Earth's ships launched their first salvo. The Zithara fleet was caught off guard. They had expected an easy victory, but instead, they were faced with a fierce, unexpected attack. The first few shots from Earth's fleet hit their targets with precision, taking out several Zithara cruisers. In a single strike, what? Varku shouted in disbelief as he watched the damage unfold on his screen. How did they do that? The Zithara ships began to respond, but they were disorganized. They hadn't anticipated this kind of resistance. As the enemy scrambled to regroup, Earth's fleet continued to press forward, each ship firing on all cylinders. The Vanguard weaved in and out of the asteroid field, avoiding enemy fire while launching devastating attacks on key targets. Every shot was calculated, every move precise. The Zithara fleet, once confident and mocking, was now in disarray. Their commanders tried to issue orders, but it was too late. Earth's fleet was too fast, too efficient. One by one, Zithara ships were taken down. The galaxy's great powers had underestimated Earth, and now they were paying the price. Varku, now in a state of panic, barked out orders, trying to regain control of the situation. But his fleet was crumbling, falling apart under the relentless assault of Earth's warships. "Retreat!" he screamed, but it was too late. The tide had turned. As the battle raged on, Captain Scott stood tall on the bridge of the Vanguard, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She knew this was only the beginning. They had made their move, and the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The mockery had ended, and Earth's warships had just proven their worth. The enemy had underestimated them, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. The Zithara fleet, once so sure of their victory, was now in retreat. The humans had struck with a force no one had expected, and they had sent a message. Earth was not to be laughed at. Earth was not weak. Earth was strong, and they were just getting started. The echoes of destruction reverberated through space as Earth's fleet struck with a force none of the galaxy's great powers had anticipated. The Zithara fleet, once so arrogant, now found itself in a state of turmoil, desperately trying to recover from the shock. The initial mockery had faded, replaced by a quiet, chilling fear that spread like wildfire throughout the ranks. Their once unshakable confidence had been shattered by the small but ferocious fleet of humans, whose warships, though seemingly outdated, had brought the mighty Zithara to their knees. Commander Varku, now pacing nervously in his command center aboard the Zithara flagship Therion, couldn't believe what was happening. He had been certain that Earth's warships would be easy to destroy, mere footnotes in the history of galactic conquest. But as the seconds ticked by, and more of his ships went silent, he realized something unsettling. The humans were not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. How are they doing this? Varku hissed, his voice strained with frustration. His eyes darted across the tactical display, where the once proud fleet of Zithara ships was now a shadow of its former self. The Therion, the heart of the Zithara fleet, was still intact, but it was surrounded by the wreckage of several of their best cruisers, now little more than drifting hulks of twisted metal. "We need to regroup," Varku said, trying to maintain control, though his tone wavered with doubt. "Our advanced systems, our weapons, should have wiped them out by now. Why aren't they retreating? Why aren't they giving up?" "Sir, we're not sure," came the voice of a subordinate officer, his voice faltering. "Their ships ... They're faster, more maneuverable than we calculated. And their weapons," he stopped, his eyes wide in disbelief. "They've breached our shields multiple times. Our defense systems are failing. They're not supposed to be able to do that." The officer's words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Zithara fleet, known for its unmatched power and sophistication, was being torn apart by a handful of human warships that barely seemed equipped to stand a chance. Something was wrong. The Zithara had been so sure, so confident, but now they were reeling. Meanwhile, aboard the Vanguard, Captain Emma Scott stood calmly at the command center, watching the chaos unfold on her ship's main display. Her heart raced, but her expression remained stoic, a reflection of the training that had brought her to this moment. The crew aboard the Vanguard was a finely tuned machine, every individual aware of their role, every command followed with precision. They had practiced for years for a moment like this, but now that the battle was in full swing, Captain Scott could sense that Earth's fleet was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of their species. "Status report," she ordered, her voice sharp. But without panic. The operations officer, Lieutenant Tessa Miles, turned to her, her face illuminated by the flickering lights of the command console. "Captain, we're holding our own. The Zithara are disorganized. Their fleets are falling apart. But we need to stay focused. This could be just the beginning. We can't let them regroup." Captain Scott nodded. "Agreed. We've taken them by surprise, but we need to press on. We know they'll counterattack. We can't afford to give them a chance to reorganize." The Vanguard had already taken down 3 of the Zithara's most advanced ships, each a testament to Earth's ingenuity. But Earth's fleet, though strong, was not invincible. The battle was far from won. The Zithara would retaliate with all their might, and the war would reach new heights of destruction. Scott couldn't afford to let the crew grow complacent. "We need to give the Zithara something to think about," Captain Scott said. "Co-coordinate with the other ships. We hit them hard, then we scatter, make them chase us." The crew worked in unison, sending orders to the rest of Earth's fleet. The ships began to break apart from their tight formation, spreading out across the battlefield in a rapid, chaotic dance. The Zithara, still trying to regain their composure, fell into disarray as the humans hit them from multiple directions at once. Back aboard the Therian, Varku could feel his control slipping away. His greatest fear had come to life. Earth's fleet wasn't just surviving, they were thriving. They were everywhere at once, unpredictable and relentless. His ships were falling faster than he could give orders. The humans had somehow turned the tide, and now the Zithara forces were scattered, desperately trying to regroup. "They can't keep this up forever," Varku muttered, though even as he spoke, doubt began to gnaw at him. "Order all ships to form up and counterattack. We need to destroy them before they get away." But his officers, once so eager to obey his every command, were now hesitant. One by one, they reported their fleets in disarray. Ships were losing communication, shields were failing, and some of the most advanced weapons in the galaxy were failing to do any damage to Earth's warships. "Sir," a voice from the weapons officer broke through Varku's reverie. "We've analyzed the data. Their ships," the officer paused, his voice faltering. "They've upgraded their engines, their weapons, their shields. We were wrong about them. They've surpassed everything we thought we knew. They've become something else." Varku's face turned pale. This was no longer just a skirmish, it was a fight for survival. The Zithara had underestimated the humans in the worst possible way. In the heart of the battle, Captain Scott stood at the bridge of the Vanguard, watching the tactical display as the remaining Zithara ships tried to regroup. She felt a growing sense of urgency, though she kept her emotions in check. Every second counted. Every movement had to be calculated. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about proving that Earth had a place in this galaxy, that humanity wasn't just some footnote to be ignored. "Deploy the drones," she ordered. "I want their ships completely surrounded." "Lieutenant." Miles quickly relayed the order, and a swarm of small, highly agile combat drones shot out from the Vanguard, surrounding the nearest Zithara warship. These drones were equipped with specialized EMP bursts designed to disable enemy electronics, leaving ships vulnerable to further attacks. The Zithara ship, unable to defend itself, was taken out in a matter of moments, and the crew of the Vanguard continued to push forward with calculated fury. Captain Scott glanced over at the ship's first officer, Commander Jacob Timmons. "Keep the pressure on," she said. "They're rattled. Now we finish what we started." The alien ships around them were beginning to falter, their weapons slow and inaccurate as Earth's fleet closed in on them. The humans had been underdogs for so long, but now they were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to dominate. As the battle raged on, the Zithara forces realized the full scope of their underestimation. Earth's fleet wasn't just a handful of old ships. They were a new breed of fighter, using tactics that were as unpredictable as they were deadly. Their warships had been rebuilt, upgraded, and prepared for this very moment. The Zithra's greatest strength, their overwhelming power, had been turned against them. Earth's fleet had shown them the true power of humanity's resolve. They weren't just the underdog anymore, they were the predator. And the galaxy was about to see that Earth had arrived. Not as a weak, isolated planet, but as a force to be reckoned with. Back in the command center of the Vanguard, the crew worked tirelessly, preparing for the next phase of the battle. The tide had turned, but it wasn't over. The Zithara would retaliate with everything they had, but Earth's fleet was ready. The mockery had ended, and humanity had proven its worth. The battle was just beginning. But one thing was clear: Earth's warships had awakened, and the galaxy would never forget the day they underestimated humanity. The battle between Earth's fleet and the Zithara Empire had shifted in unexpected ways. What had begun as a surprise skirmish quickly turned into a full-scale war, but this time, the Zithara were on the back foot. Earth's warships, once underestimated and ridiculed, had proven their might, scattering the once proud fleets of the alien empire. But even in the wake of such a decisive blow, the real fight was only just beginning. Captain Emma Scott stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, her eyes scanning the tactical display, still glowing with the data from the previous battles. The Zithara fleet had been decimated, but they weren't gone. Not yet. The Zithara were regrouping, retreating to their stronghold, but not without purpose. Captain Scott knew this wouldn't be the end. Their retreat was a carefully executed tactical maneuver, and the Zithara were never to be underestimated. "We've done some damage," Captain Scott said, her voice calm yet filled with determination. "But now we prepare for the next phase. We've got them on the ropes, but we need to finish this." She turned to her first officer, Commander Jacob Timmons, who stood nearby, his face illuminated by the faint blue light of the screen in front of him. He didn't need to be told. He already knew that the Zithara were far from defeated. The surprise attack had left their fleets shattered, but the real threat was their ability to regroup. "Let's keep the pressure on them. Make sure they don't have time to recover," Scott continued, as she gave him a quick nod. Timmons tapped the control panel and transmitted the order to the fleet. The Vanguard and the other remaining warships began to spread out, moving through space like a swarm of deadly locusts, each ship poised for the next strike. Earth's fleet was now well known for its unpredictability, and they would use that to their advantage. The Zithara could no longer make assumptions about humanity's capabilities, and that uncertainty would be their undoing. The enemy was trying to reorganize in the outer reaches of the Chord system, a series of small moons and asteroid fields that would give the Zithara an advantage in defense. The Vanguard and its fleet weren't large, but they had become experts in guerrilla warfare, taking advantage of their superior maneuverability and rapid strike capabilities. They had learned from the first engagement. The key now was to stay unpredictable. As the fleet moved toward the Zithra's new formation, Captain Scott knew that there was more to this war than just strength and firepower. Earth's fleet, though powerful, was not invulnerable. They had to outsmart the Zithara, something no one had ever expected humanity to do. While the Zithara relied on overwhelming force, Earth's strategy was centered on deception, surprise, and the element of chaos. "Captain," Timmons said, his voice breaking through her thoughts, We've detected several energy signatures just beyond the asteroid field. They're preparing something big. Scott nodded. That's what we've been waiting for. Let's go. But stay alert. We can't give them a chance to set up anything substantial. The Zithara, meanwhile, were not idle. In the silence of the command center aboard the Therian, Supreme Commander Varku seethed in anger. The defeat had been embarrassing. But it was far from over. They would recover, and they would annihilate the humans, but it required more than just brute force. It required intelligence. Something Earth had used against them. Varku's mind raced as he pieced together the situation. Earth's tactics had baffled him. Their ships were outnumbered, outgunned, yet they had fought with the ferocity of a species that had nothing to lose. That, Varku understood. The humans had fought for survival before. They weren't like any race he had ever encountered. Their resolve was something more than just battle-hardened. They fought with heart. His second-in-command, Commander Zorith, stepped forward. Supreme Commander, we cannot afford another setback. We must regroup, but we must also anticipate their next move. They are clever. This is not a race we can win by strength alone. Varku gritted his teeth. Agreed. They will continue to use guerrilla tactics. But we can't let them turn this into a game of cat and mouse. We need to strike first. Varku turned to his officers, his gaze cold. Prepare a fleet of decoys. We'll simulate a full retreat, but we'll leave behind a trap. The humans will follow, and when they do, we'll crush them with our hidden fleet. Commander Zorith hesitated for a moment. But what if they see through the ruse? Varku smirked, his eyes gleaming with cold confidence. They won't. They're too eager to finish this. Their arrogance will be their downfall. Back on the Vanguard, Captain Scott observed the situation with growing concern. They had been tracking the Zithra's movements, but something didn't feel right. The Zithara had always relied on sheer force, but now they were playing a different game, one where strength alone wouldn't win them the war. Something's off, Scott muttered, almost to herself. Timmons, who had been monitoring the communications, turned to her. Captain, we've detected a shift in their energy readings. They're setting up something massive, too massive to be a simple counterattack. Prepare for anything, Scott ordered. They're planning something, and we need to be ready. The Vanguard and the rest of Earth's fleet adjusted their course, anticipating the worst. As they moved through the asteroid field, it became clear that the Zithara had set a trap. A series of decoy ships, rigged with powerful energy sources, began to light up on the radar. The Zithara had played their hand, but they had underestimated one thing. Earth was ready for this. The decoys began to fire, luring Earth's ships into their line of sight. But Captain Scott was not fooled. She had anticipated this move. Full evasive maneuvers, she ordered. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. The fleet swerved and danced through the asteroid field, weaving around the decoys with the grace of a predator. The Zithara fleet, lying in wait, activated their hidden fleet, but it was already too late. Earth's ships were too quick, too unpredictable. Deploy the drones, Captain Scott ordered. A swarm of agile combat drones shot out from the Vanguard, targeting the decoys first. They tore through the false ships, rendering them useless in moments. As the drones neutralized the threats, the Zithra's trap began to fall apart. Earth's warships were far too fast for the Zithara to catch off guard. The Zithara commander, Varku, watched from the command center of the Therian as his plan began to unravel. His fleet had taken the bait. The humans had done exactly what he expected, but they had also turned the tables. They had reacted with a precision he had not anticipated. All units, open fire, Varku commanded, his anger boiling over. The Zithara warships erupted into a flurry of activity, their weapons locked and primed. They began to target Earth's fleet, but it was too late. The humans had already prepared their countermeasures. The vanguard split from the formation, weaving through enemy fire. "They're not going to give up," Captain Scott said, watching as Earth's ships continued to evade the incoming blasts. "And neither are we." With their plans foiled, the Zithara were left with no other option but to fight on. Earth's fleet had once again outmaneuvered them. The Zithara might have had overwhelming firepower, but Earth had something that no one else had, the ability to think beyond the obvious. Captain Scott's mind was clear as she watched the battlefield unfold before her. "This is far from over," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "We forced their hand. Now we finish it." The Zithara were finally starting to realize what they had missed. They had underestimated Earth's true strength, not just its firepower, but its ability to outthink its enemies. The real battle had just begun, and the galaxy would soon know the cost of underestimating humanity. The war had been brutal, unrelenting, and filled with unexpected twists. Earth's fleet, once thought to be nothing more than a futile attempt by a weak planet to stand against the might of the galaxy's most powerful empire, had proven itself in ways no one could have imagined. The Zithara Empire, whose fleets had once been considered invincible, had been caught off guard by the humans' cunning strategies, unexpected precision, and sheer will to survive. Now, Earth's forces found themselves at a pivotal moment in the battle. The tide of the war had shifted in their favor, but the Zithara were not easily defeated. Their strength, once overwhelming, was beginning to dwindle, but their resolve remained unbroken. Earth's fleet had inflicted serious damage, but the enemy was not done yet. The Zithara had regrouped, and they were preparing for their final counteroffensive. The question was, could humanity continue to outmaneuver an enemy that had learned from its mistakes? Captain Emma Scott stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, her mind racing as she watched the holographic display flicker with the latest data. The Zithara fleet had retreated to a newly established stronghold, an ancient moon. Once abandoned, now converted into a heavily fortified base. Earth's fleet had already dealt a devastating blow to their forces, but now they were preparing for the most critical part of the battle, taking down the Zithara stronghold and ending this war for good. "Captain," Commander Jacob Timmons said, breaking through her thoughts, "we've detected new energy signatures. It looks like the Zithara are preparing a full-scale assault. They're not giving up." Scott nodded grimly. "They never do. But we've already taken down their strongest ships. They may be able to muster another offensive, but it's going to be different this time. We're ready." The Zithara had learned from their past mistakes. They no longer underestimated Earth's fleet. But Captain Scott and her crew had also learned something crucial. The Zithara's greatest strength, brute force, was also their greatest weakness. They relied too much on overwhelming power and traditional tactics. What they didn't expect was the humans' ability to think outside the box and turn the tables in ways that caught them off guard every time. "Prepare the fleet," Scott ordered, her voice calm but filled with determination. "This ends today." On the command deck of the Therian, Supreme Commander Varku glared at the tactical readout as the latest intelligence reports flooded in. His fleet was battered, his forces stretched thin, but he had not given up. Not yet. The humans were clever, they were resilient, but the Zithara were nothing if not relentless. They had pushed humanity to the edge, but they would not let a small, insignificant planet stand in their way. "We're going to crush them," Varku, Zithara Commander Zorith said, his voice dark and steady. "This time we overwhelm them. We'll send them a message that will be heard across the galaxy." Varku, though exhausted from the ongoing war, nodded in agreement. He knew this was their last chance. They had gathered their remaining forces and fortified their position on the moon. The humans had outsmarted them at every turn, but this time, Varku would make sure they would not escape. He had one last trick up his sleeve, a weapon so powerful that it would crush Earth's fleet once and for all. "We will launch everything," "We have," Varku said, his eyes hardening. "The humans may have outmaneuvered us, but they cannot withstand this. They are nothing compared to the might of the Zithara Empire." Captain Scott paced on the bridge of the Vanguard, her mind spinning. With strategy, Earth's fleet had suffered casualties, but they were still standing strong. The key to this next phase of the battle would be speed, precision, and timing. She needed to strike fast and hard before the Zithara had a chance to launch their final assault. "We've detected their movements," Timmons reported. "They're preparing to launch a massive counteroffensive. Their main fleet is heading straight for our position." Scott's eyes narrowed. "This is it then. They've thrown everything they have at us. It's their last shot. We're ready for them," Timmons said, a note of confidence in his voice. The rest of the crew worked in perfect synchronization, preparing the Vanguard for the incoming battle. Scott glanced at the tactical display. The Zithara fleet, now in a tight formation, was rapidly approaching. The moon was now the center of their operations, and if Earth's fleet was going to take the stronghold, it would have to be done swiftly. Every move would count. There could be no mistakes. "Deploy the drones," Scott ordered. "We'll divide and conquer. We take out their secondary fleet first, then go for the stronghold. This has to be done with precision." As the drones were launched, Captain Scott felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't because she was unconcerned, but because she knew they had done everything they could to prepare for this moment. The Zithara had underestimated Earth's fleet, and now they would pay the price for that mistake. Varku watched in disbelief as Earth's warships, despite their smaller numbers, began to break apart his fleet with ease. His own forces, though large, were not as nimble as Earth's ships. His ships were designed for power and strength, but that made them predictable, slow, and cumbersome. "Commander Zorith, what's happening?" Varku demanded. "We've launched everything we have. Why aren't they falling?" Zorith's face was grim. "They're too fast, Varku. We've lost the element of surprise. Their drones are swarming us, and their warships are too quick. We can't target them effectively. They've learned our tactics. We're being outplayed." Varku's hands clenched into fists. "It can't be over. Not like this. We cannot allow the humans to win." Captain Scott surveyed the battlefield with focused intensity. Her mind was calculating, her every decision precise. The Zithara fleet was strong, but it was too slow. The humans, though fewer in number, had the advantage of speed, agility, and unorthodox tactics. Earth's ships darted in and out of enemy fire, launching pinpoint attacks on the Zithra's weaker ships and isolating their main fleet from their support vessels. "We've isolated their secondary fleet," Timmons announced, his voice steady. "They're falling back to their stronghold." "Good," Scott said, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Now we go for the heart of their operation." She motioned to the strategic console. The Vanguard, along with a few other ships, moved in to strike. At the moon, the Zithara had built their defenses around it, believing it to be their last refuge, but it was now a target. The humans had no intention of letting the Zithara escape. "All ships, focus fire on their central defense tower," Scott ordered her, voice filled with conviction. "Take it down, and the rest of their forces will crumble." On the Therian, Varku's face twisted with anger and desperation. His fleet was in disarray, and the once proud empire was beginning to falter. The humans had outsmarted him again, exploiting every weakness, exploiting every flaw. He watched as his last remaining ships were slowly picked apart by Earth's nimble forces. They had underestimated the humans, and now it was too late. "Commander Zorith, prepare the final weapon," Varku commanded, his voice cold. "If we're going down, we're going down fighting." Zorith looked at him, uncertain. "The weapon... It's risky. It could destroy everything around us, including us." Varku's gaze never wavered. "Do it. We cannot let Earth's fleet win." Back at the Vanguard, Captain Scott's eyes narrowed as she saw the energy signatures coming from the Zithara stronghold. "They're preparing something," she murmured. "A last-ditch effort. They're desperate." Timmins quickly analyzed. "The data. Captain, it's a weapon something huge. It could wipe out our entire fleet in one strike." Scott's heart raced. "All ships retreat now. Full evasive maneuvers." But it was already too late. The Zithara unleashed their final weapon, a massive energy pulse, so powerful it seemed to shake the very fabric of space itself. The pulse shot out from the heart of the Zithara stronghold, aimed directly at Earth's fleet. In the seconds that followed, the fleet scattered, trying to avoid the blast. The Vanguard weaved through the oncoming energy wave, barely escaping the deadly surge. The pulse hit its target, ripping through the void of space and vaporizing anything in its path. A flash of light brighter than a star erupted from the Zithara stronghold, and the warships that hadn't managed to escape were consumed in its wake. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the Zithara had won. But as the light of the blast faded, the surviving Earthships reappeared, battered but not defeated. They had dodged the worst of the blast, but now they had a choice: continue the battle and destroy the Zithara once and for all, or retreat and preserve their strength for another day. The decision was clear. "This is it," Captain Scott said, her voice resolute. "We end this now. The Zithara Empire is finished." The final battle had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The aftermath of the Zithara's final weapon was catastrophic. Captain Emma Scott stood at the bridge of the Vanguard, watching the display flicker with the wreckage of enemy ships. The pulse they had unleashed had been powerful, too powerful, but Earth's fleet had survived. Though battered and scattered, they were still standing, still alive. The Zithara had hoped to crush them all in one swift strike, but they had underestimated Earth's resilience. Now, as the smoke cleared and the debris from the battle drifted in the cold emptiness of space, Scott knew this was not the time to rest. The Zithara Empire had been pushed to the brink, but they were not yet defeated. Varku, though shaken, still controlled a significant portion of the fleet, and Earth's forces had to be ready for the counterattack that was inevitable. "Status report," Scott asked, her voice steady as her eyes stayed locked on the viewscreen. "Lieutenant." Tessa Miles, her operations officer, quickly turned from her console. "We've sustained heavy damage, Captain. Several ships have been hit, but most of the fleet is still intact. The Vanguard has sustained some structural damage, but we're in fighting shape." "Good," Scott said, her tone resolute. "Prepare for immediate engagement. The Zithara won't give us time to breathe. We need to strike now before they have the chance to regroup." The bridge hummed with activity as the crew moved with practiced efficiency. Earth's warships, while damaged, were still formidable. The Zithara had thrown their most destructive weapon at them and failed, but Scott knew that the real test was coming. Varku would not back down. He had too much pride, and the Zithara were too ruthless to allow such a defeat to go unpunished. "Captain, we've detected a massive energy buildup near their position," Commander Jacob Timmins said, his eyes scanning the readings. "They're preparing for something big. It looks like they're going for broke." Scott's brow furrowed. "Their last weapon wasn't enough to defeat us. What could they have left?" "Whatever it is, we'll have to deal with it," Timmins replied. "We should hit them hard before they have the chance to deploy whatever they're planning." Scott nodded. "Set course for their fleet. Full speed ahead. Let's make sure they never recover." Meanwhile, aboard the Therian, Supreme Commander Varku stood before the battle map, his fists clenched in frustration. The Zithara had suffered a humiliating defeat, and though his forces had managed to land a blow on Earth's fleet, it had not been enough to destroy them. The humans were more resilient than he had ever imagined, and every time he thought he had them cornered, they managed to slip away. But now they had made a critical mistake. They had given him a window of opportunity, a Chance to strike when they were vulnerable. Varku turned to his officers. Prepare the secondary fleet for a counteroffensive. We're going to take the fight to them. We can't let them regroup. Zorith, his second in command, stepped forward, looking troubled. Supreme Commander, we've lost over half our fleet. Even with the new weapon, we don't have enough strength to face the humans head-on. We're at a disadvantage. Varku's eyes narrowed. If we wait for them to recover, it will be too late. We must strike now. Our only hope is to overwhelm them. If we hit them with everything we have left, we can break their resolve. Zorith hesitated, but nodded. Very well. I'll begin preparations. Varku turned to his weapon specialist. Activate the new weapon. This will be our final chance. We cannot afford to fail again. The weapon Varku had been so desperate to deploy was not just another energy pulse or missile. This was something more, an experimental device capable of disrupting the very fabric of space itself. It could distort gravitational fields, tear apart ships at the molecular level, and create shockwaves so powerful they could rip entire fleets asunder. It was a weapon that had been developed in secret, a last-ditch effort to ensure Zithara dominance. Now it was their only hope. As the weapon powered up, Varku could feel his heart pounding in anticipation. He was betting everything on this final strike. If the weapon worked, Earth's fleet would be no more. If it failed, the Zithara would be finished. Back on the Vanguard, Scott had received the same information that had reached Varku. The Zithara were preparing something huge, and their fleet was regrouping. Scott knew this was their final push. The Zithara were pulling out all the stops, but Earth's fleet wasn't going to back down. They had already proven they could survive against the odds. They had fought for this moment, and they weren't about to let the Zithara retake control now. We've got to move fast, Scott said, her voice low and filled with urgency. Coordinate with the other ships. We take them out in one final strike. Timmons nodded. A full-on assault then. Scott nodded. Yes, we'll hit their fleet and their stronghold at the same time. No retreat. We end this today. The Vanguard moved forward, the rest of Earth's fleet following in perfect formation. The Zithara had regrouped, but they had no idea what was coming. Earth's warships were fast, precise, and relentless. Their maneuvers were unpredictable, and they were about to take the Zithara by surprise once again. Varku watched as his weapon powered up, the energy surging through the core of his ship. He could feel the tension in the air as he waited for the device to reach full power. The weapon would create a distortion in space, a rip in the fabric of the universe itself. Anything within its range would be obliterated. Ships, people, anything caught in its blast would cease to exist. The Zithara would have victory at last. Ready, Supreme Commander, the weapons officer said, his voice tight with anticipation. The weapon is fully charged. Varku's lips curled into a cold smile. Fire it. The Zithara unleashed their weapon, and the very air around them seemed to bend and warp. The blast shot out from the Therian toward Earth's fleet, creating an intense gravitational field that threatened to tear everything apart. The energy was so massive that even light seemed to bend around it. It was a weapon like no other, one that could destroy the Earth fleet in a single moment. But Captain Scott was ready. Full evasive maneuvers. She ordered. The Vanguard and the rest of Earth's fleet scrambled to avoid the incoming blast. It was a chaotic, desperate attempt to avoid being obliterated, but Scott's crew was trained for moments like this. The Vanguard veered sharply, the ship's engines roaring as it barely avoided the full brunt of the weapon. Several other ships were not so lucky, caught in the blast and torn apart by the distortion. Report, Scott demanded, her voice tense. We've lost 3 ships. Captain, Timmons said, his voice strained. But the Vanguard is still operational. We've taken some damage, but we're still in the fight. Scott's eyes narrowed. The Zithara had thrown everything they had at them, but Earth's fleet was still standing. And now they were ready to turn the tide once again. "We've got them on the ropes," Scott said, her voice filled with resolve. "We hit them hard now. They're vulnerable. No more playing defense. We end this." The battle was far from over, but Captain Scott knew that Earth's fleet had taken another step toward victory. The Zithara were wounded, their weaponry spent, and their forces scattered. Now Earth would press forward with all their might, refusing to let the enemy regroup again. As Earth's warships surged forward, Scott's mind was clear. This was the final moment, the one where victory would either be seized or lost. And as the Vanguard hurtled toward the heart of the Zithara fleet, she knew that whatever happened next, humanity had already proven its place in the galaxy. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The aftermath of the Zithra's final weapon was still fresh in the minds of Earth's fleet. The skies of the Korrid system, once a place of tranquility, were now filled with debris and the shattered remains of battle. Though Earth's fleet had been battered by the powerful energy pulse, the fight was not over. The Zithara had pulled their last card and played it with desperation, but they had failed to break the resolve of Earth's fleet. What they had not anticipated was the sheer determination and cunning of humanity. Now, as Earth's warships maneuvered through the wreckage, Captain Emma Scott stood at the bridge of the Vanguard, her gaze locked onto the tactical display. The Zithara were retreating, but they were not running from the battle, they were regrouping. Their last weapon had failed, but they were far from done. The final counterattack was coming, and Scott knew this would be the most dangerous part of the war. The Zithara had been cornered, and their response would be swift and brutal. "Captain," Commander Jacob Timmons said, his voice grave, "we've detected a new wave of Zithara ships approaching. It's a full fleet. They're preparing for a final assault." Scott took a deep breath, her thoughts racing. The Zithara were on their last legs, but they were not going to go down. Quietly, she could feel the weight of the situation. This was it, the final stand. "We've come this far," Scott said, her voice steady but with an underlying tension. "We can't afford to let them regroup. If we allow them to rebuild, they'll come back stronger than ever. We need to finish this now." "Understood, Captain," Timmons replied, turning to relay the orders. The Vanguard began to move forward, its engines roaring as it cut through the silence of space. Earth's fleet, though battered, was still strong. The ships were fast and nimble, ready to deliver a decisive blow. The Zithara, once confident in their superiority, were now on the back foot. But the Zithara were nothing if not relentless, and Scott knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. On the Therian, Supreme Commander Varku was seething with rage. His final weapon had failed, and his fleet had suffered irreparable damage. The Therian itself had taken hits, and several of his most trusted commanders had fallen in battle. Yet, Varku refused to concede. The Zithara were an empire of warriors, and they would not let a single defeat define them. His officers, too, knew that this was their last chance. If they failed now, the Zithara would be finished. "We've got one more shot at this," Varku muttered, his eyes focused on the tactical readout. "Prepare the fleet. We launch everything we have left. No holding back. If we fail now, the galaxy will remember us as nothing more than a dying empire." "Understood, Supreme Commander," Zorath replied, his voice cold but resolute. "We'll take the fight to them. If we're going down, we'll go down fighting." Varku nodded. The time for caution was over. The Zithara had underestimated Earth at every turn, but they would not make that mistake again. They would unleash everything they had, and if the humans survived this final assault, they deserved the victory. But Varku was determined to make sure they did not. "Activate the fleet's last reserve forces," Varku commanded. "Deploy the shock troops. I want every last ship engaged in this battle." As the Zithara fleet prepared for its final push, Earth's fleet was already moving toward their position. The Zithara had taken the bait, and now Earth's warships were closing in. The battle would come down to strategy and execution, and Captain Scott had every confidence in her crew. This was their moment. The battle had already shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, but this final strike would solidify their place among the stars. Scott stood tall on the bridge, watching the ever-approaching threat on the display. Target the Zithra's command ships. We cut off their leadership, and the rest will fall apart. Firing solutions locked in. Timmons confirmed, his fingers dancing over the controls. All ships are in position. The Zithara don't know what's coming. Scott's gaze hardened. Let's show them what it means to mess with humanity. The Vanguard and the rest of Earth's fleet moved as one, closing the distance to the Zithara forces. The Zithara had been confident that they could withstand the oncoming assault, but their final regrouping was anything but organized. They had prepared their weapons, but the Zithara had failed to anticipate one crucial factor. Earth's warships were not the same enemy they had fought before. The first volley from Earth's fleet hit the Zithra's formation hard, cutting through the front lines like a hot knife through butter. The Vanguard tore through the enemy's shields, its weapon systems calibrated to target weaknesses. The Zithara ships, once thought invincible, were now struggling to hold their ground. Earth's warships were everywhere at once, moving with precision and speed, overwhelming the Zithara with relentless fire. "Captain, their shields are down." One of the officers called out, "We're breaching their hulls. The Zithara are retreating." But Scott knew better than to believe the battle was won. The Zithara weren't retreating, they were reorganizing. They were preparing for one final, desperate charge. The sky around them erupted into chaos as the Zithara unleashed their final wave of ships. These were not the sleek, powerful cruisers that had once dominated the galaxy. These were desperate ships, hastily rebuilt from the remnants of fallen warships. Their weapons were crude and their shields weak, but they were packed with explosives, ready to sacrifice themselves in a final act of retaliation. The Zithara had decided to fight until the end, knowing full well that their empire would fall if they didn't give everything they had. These were their last warriors, fighting not for survival, but for honor. "This is it," Scott said, her voice grim. "Brace for impact." The final assault began as the Zithara ships charged forward, their weapons firing indiscriminately. Earth's fleet swerved and dodged, narrowly avoiding the explosive volleys. The Zithara were throwing everything they had left, hoping to take down as many Earth ships as possible before they were destroyed. "We've got incoming," Timmons shouted. "They're targeting the Vanguard." Scott's hand shot out to the console. "Evasive maneuvers now." The Vanguard darted through the chaos of enemy fire, narrowly missing the incoming blasts. Earth's fleet had learned how to counter Zithara tactics, and now the tables were turned. Zithara ships, desperate and reckless, began colliding with each other, their lines collapsing under the sheer force of Earth's counterattack. But the Vanguard was not out of danger yet. A Zithara ship, in its final moments, locked its sights on Earth's flagship, launching one final desperate missile. The missile tore through the void, headed straight for the Vanguard. There was no time to avoid it. The crew braced for the explosion, knowing this could be the end. At the last moment, the Vanguard's defensive systems activated. A powerful pulse of energy shot out from the ship's core, intercepting the missile in mid-flight. The explosion that followed was massive, but it was contained within the shield. The Vanguard shuddered, but it remained intact. Scott took a deep breath. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Press the attack." As Earth's fleet closed in on the Zithara stronghold, the tide of the battle was unmistakable. The Zithara had fought with everything they had, but their final push had failed. The humans had learned and adapted at every turn, countering every tactic, outwitting every strategy. The remaining Zithara ships were in full retreat, their numbers dwindling by the second. The Vanguard moved in for the final blow. Earth's warships locked onto their targets, delivering the finishing strikes with precision. One by one, the Zithara ships exploded in violent flashes of light, their once mighty fleet reduced to nothing. But debris as the Zithara Empire fell apart. Captain Scott stood tall on the bridge, watching the battlefield. Her heart raced, but her mind was calm. The fight had been long, and it had cost them dearly, but humanity had triumphed. They had shown the galaxy that Earth was not to be underestimated, that they were no longer a weak, insignificant planet. "Victory is ours," she said quietly as the final remnants of the Zithara fleet disintegrated into space. "The galaxy will never forget this day." The war was over, and Earth had emerged victorious. But the cost had been high, and the scars of the battle would remain for years to come. Still, humanity had proven one undeniable truth. They were a force to be reckoned with. The echoes of battle had finally faded, and the galaxy was left to process the unimaginable. Earth had won. After a brutal war against the seemingly invincible Zithara Empire, the small, overlooked planet had emerged victorious, defeating an empire that had been feared across the stars for millennia. But as the silence of space settled in, Captain Emma Scott stood on the bridge of the Vanguard. Her eyes focused on the debris-filled expanse that was once a battlefield. The war was over, but the consequences of the conflict had left their mark. Earth's fleet had suffered heavy casualties, ships destroyed, lives lost, and resources drained. Yet they had survived. They had fought, adapted, and ultimately triumphed, proving that even the most formidable foes could be overcome with strategy, willpower, and ingenuity. Scott stood in the quiet aftermath, her mind still processing the gravity of what had just transpired. She felt the weight of the victory, but also the heaviness of the loss. The cost of their success had been high, but it had been necessary. They had fought not just for survival, but for the future of Earth, for the future of humanity in a galaxy that had once viewed them as insignificant. "Captain, Commander," Jacob Timmons called out, breaking her thoughts. "The fleet is stabilizing. We've accounted for all the survivors. We're getting ready to head back to Earth." Scott nodded, her gaze never leaving the view of space. "Understood. Let me know when we're ready to jump." She had led them through this battle, through a war that no one on Earth had ever imagined they'd be forced to fight. And now it was time to go home. But even though they had won, there were still many questions that lingered in the silence of the cosmos. What came next for humanity? What would their place be in a galaxy that had just witnessed their strength? The Vanguard and the rest of Earth's surviving fleet began their journey back to Earth. The long trek through space now filled with a quiet, somber atmosphere. The once boisterous crew of the Vanguard had grown reflective, the reality of what they had achieved settling in. They had faced impossible odds, but they had prevailed. The Zithara were no more. Their fleets had been destroyed, their leadership shattered, and their empire reduced to nothing. But Earth had been forever changed. The war had left scars on their ships, on their people, and on their collective psyche. The journey home was not just a physical one, but a mental and emotional one as well. Captain Scott stood at the bridge, her eyes focused on the stars ahead, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "Earth is waiting for us," Timmons said, his voice quieter than usual. "The war is over, we did it." Scott nodded, but there was no sense of triumph in her expression. "Yes, we did," she replied, her voice tinged with a sense of deep thought. "But at what cost?" Timmons didn't reply immediately, his eyes focused on the holographic display as they passed through the remnants of the Zithra's homeworld. "Sometimes there are no easy answers," he said after a moment. "We fought for survival, for the future of Earth, and we won. We're alive. We're going home." Scott glanced at him. "I know, but we can never forget what we had to do to get here. This victory came at a price. The lives we lost, the battles we fought, they all have to mean something. We can't just go back to business as usual." Timon seemed to understand what she was saying. "We won't. But the world we come back to, it won't be the same. We've proven that Earth is not to be underestimated. We've shown the galaxy that humanity is more than just a backwater planet. We have a place here now." Scott nodded. "We do. But we also have to be careful. This victory doesn't mean we can let our guard down. The galaxy is vast, and there are always threats. Our work is far from done." Back on Earth, the world had already begun to feel the weight of the victory. News of Earth's triumph spread across every corner of the planet, and it wasn't long before the celebration began. Governments, leaders, and civilians alike recognized the significance of this achievement. The once feeble planet, dismissed as insignificant by the rest of the galaxy, had just toppled the most powerful empire in existence. It was a victory that would reverberate throughout history, reshaping humanity's future. But even in the celebration, there was a quiet understanding. The war had come at an incredible cost. Many families had lost loved ones. Cities had been reduced to rubble, and the rebuilding would take years. Earth's military forces were forever altered by the experience, and the scars of war were something that could never be fully erased. Despite the celebrations, there was no sense of false hope. The people of Earth knew that they could not rest on their laurels. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's strength, but it had also witnessed their capacity for destruction. Earth was no longer a passive observer in the galactic community. They had shown that they could defend themselves. But with that power came responsibility. As the Vanguard entered Earth's orbit, Captain Scott looked out the window of the bridge, staring at the planet below. Earth was beautiful blue oceans, green landscapes, and sprawling cities. It had survived centuries of conflict, environmental collapse, and political strife. Now it had survived the greatest threat it had ever known. But the future was uncertain. The war had changed them, and it had changed the galaxy's perception of them. The question now was, what would humanity do with that new position? "Captain, Earth Command is hailing us," Timon said, his voice breaking through Scott's thoughts. Scott straightened, nodding. "Put it through." The face of a high-ranking officer appeared on the screen, her expression serious. "Captain Scott, welcome home. Earth has been waiting for this moment. The victory you've achieved will be remembered for generations to come, but there is much work ahead of us." "We're ready," Scott replied, her voice firm. "We've come back, but we know that the fight isn't over. We've earned our place in the galaxy, but now we have to protect it." The officer nodded. "That's why Earth has already begun to plan the next steps. We need to rebuild, strengthen our defenses, and ensure that we're never caught off guard again. But we also need to explore. There are vast, unexplored regions of space out there. It's time for humanity to reach beyond the stars to establish new alliances, and to ensure that this victory means something." Scott's eyes flickered as she listened. "We've proven we can fight. Now we need to prove we can build something better, something lasting. We need to ensure that this war is never repeated." The officer smiled slightly. "Indeed. The future of Earth is in our hands. We will rebuild, but we will also expand. This war has shown that humanity is capable of great things. The stars are now within our reach." As Earth's fleet entered the atmosphere, the celebrations began in earnest. The streets of every major city were filled with cheering crowds, waving flags and banners. People danced, sang, and celebrated the hard-won peace. For the first time in history, humanity had shown the galaxy that they were not simply a fledgling race on the fringe of space. They had proven that they could stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. But for Captain Scott and her crew, the celebrations were subdued. The war had taken a toll on them, and they knew that the true work was just beginning. The future of Earth and humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured for now. But there would always be new challenges, new threats, and new opportunities. "Captain," Timmons said, standing beside her on the bridge. "We did it. We've secured Earth's future." Scott nodded, her eyes still focused on the planet below. "Yes, we did. But the real work starts now. We've earned our place in the galaxy, but we can never forget what it took to get here. We must keep pushing forward." Timmons smiled. "We will, together." As the Vanguard drifted into Earth's orbit, Scott finally allowed herself a moment of peace. They had fought for this. They had sacrificed for this. And now humanity had a chance to shape its own destiny. The war was over, but the story of Earth's future was just beginning.